We now move on to an important debate about freehold estate fees, and I'm going to call upon Helen Goodman to move the motion.
I beg to move that this House has considered the matter of freehold estate fees. I'd like to begin, of course, by saying what a pleasure it is to see you in the chair this afternoon, Mr Hollowbone. The residents of Hazelbank in Canny Hill in my constituency first brought this issue to my attention. I'm very grateful to them and to homeowners in the Burton Woods, Durham Gate, Grangefields, Murrington Park, Midridge Vale and Moorcroft developments who've shared their experiences with me. I also wish to thank Cathy Priestley and Halima Ali from the Homeowners' Rights Network campaign group, Hornet. It's a national campaign group.
I congratulate my honourable friend and North East colleague on securing this really important debate and her bill, of which I am pleased to be a co-sponsor. And I'm also pleased to add my thanks and commendation for the work of my Great Park constituent, Cathy Priestley, who she rightly mentions as she has worked really tirelessly to raise awareness of these issues. And does she agree with me and Cathy Priestley, my constituent, that one of the key concerns for private homeowners is the sheer lack of transparency in terms of the charging brought forward through these developments and the lack of transparency about exactly what it is homeowners are paying for?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. The lack of transparency is a significant problem, and I did a survey, and it's a problem across the entire country, Mr Hollowbone. I thought that this survey was going to be for people in Bishop Auckland. I got responses from Ulster to Plymouth, so we can see from that what a massive problem this is. When offered the choice between a leasehold and a freehold property, most prospective home buyers would opt for freehold. Who wouldn't want the permanent and absolute tenure of their property with all the freedom and security that this promises? But the large property developers, Barratt, Bellway, Persimmon and Taylor Wimpey, are selling properties which are not free from hold. They come with the financial obligations and restrictive covenants administered by property management companies such as Greenbelt, Gateway, First Port and Trinity Estates, which take ownership of communal spaces once the developer has moved off the site.
Will my honourable friend give way? Can I congratulate her on securing this debate? She mentioned Greenbelt, and I've had a problem in my constituency that goes back 16 years when a group purchased houses from Bellway, and the adjoining land is administered by Greenbelt. And since then, they have found year by year they have been paying fees for the very basic administration of that. And the company has failed to take the remedial measures necessary to prevent the area from becoming a centre for antisocial behaviour. The residents have complained. One has been to court but lost the case. Does she agree with me that there needs to be more transparency when freeholders buy their property from the developers? And secondly, an cheap adjudication system that ensures that the balance of interest between the freeholders and the companies is far more even than it is at the moment.
Yes, of course. There needs to be more transparency. There needs to be a system of redress, as my honourable friend says, and there also needs to be some rules of the game about the standard to which the estates are built in the first instance. The management companies charge residents an inflated annual fee in exchange, apparently, for tending to grassy areas or shrubs and other facilities on the estate. This is on top of their council tax, Mr Hollowbone. This is a scandal. There has clearly been mis-selling. The public perception of freehold is deliberately exploited by the property companies in their sales materials, and many home buyers are not made aware of arrangements for the management of open spaces until the completion of the sale. one of my constituents reported that the first they'd heard of their management company, which was in fact Greenbelt, was a threatening late payment letter. They hadn't received a bill, let alone a welcome pack. While there is no room in the glossy brochure for an outline of the legal arrangements, there always seems to be plenty of space for images of parks, playgrounds, woodland areas, backed up by verbal assurances from the sales rep that they are planned for the estate. These promises are then broken and land is passed or sold onto the maintenance company. For example, at Durham Gate, a large housing development in Spennymoor in my constituency, the plans promised a green spine running through the centre of the site. Several years in, with the site still under construction, residents are being hit with a full price fee of £120 a year. Another of my constituents reported receiving a maintenance bill for a parking area that didn't exist. The fees charged to residents for the maintenance of their estates are high, rising, uncapped and completely unregulated. In Bishop Auckland, the annual fee for each household is somewhere between £100 and £200 per year, depending on the site. At first, this doesn't sound too onerous, but when you consider that 278 of your neighbours on the estate are also paying this fee, it's obviously a grossly excessive £30,000 just for mowing some grass. In other parts of the country, in line with higher house prices, fees can be up to £400, £600. I've even heard of £800 a year. There is no limit to price increases, and residents frequently report an annual leap in the fee. As my honourable friends have said, there's no transparency and little accountability.
I thank my honourable friend for securing this debate. I think I would draw a comparison between the kind of fees that councils ordinarily charge for communal services and the kind of fees you're talking about. Does she agree with me that if councils were so opaque and so unreasonable, they would rightly be held to task by their electorate?
Well, that's a very good point that my honourable friend makes. And I think we do need more transparency and we do need greater accountability. And I'm going to come on to how we might secure those things. One of the things that homeowners have said is that their frustration is that they don't have any control over who the managing agent is. And the relationship between the big builders, their favourite management companies, and the processes for acquiring these communal spaces are shrouded in mystery. The fees appear to be plucked from thin air. In some cases, a vague administration category accounts for up to 70% of the total bill. What then do homeowners get in exchange for their fee? Of the 200 people who completed my survey, only one indicated a very good standard of maintenance. However, this was perhaps an optimistic assessment. The person went on to explain, the grass is cut regularly, but we were promised a play park and village green with a pond, none of which have materialised. Others complained of dead or dying trees, poorly maintained shrubberies, wastelands, fly tipping, broken or absent street lighting, playgrounds awaiting repair, and a general absence of their management company, aside from requests for payment. Specific complaints included how Greenbelt were using a strimmer within a dedicated nature park set up to protect newts. In another case, a community hedgerow project was destroyed. Homeowners in freehold properties currently have no way to challenge unfair fees or poor service. The power is almost entirely in the hands of the management company. My constituents have faced threats to block the on-sale of their properties. They've been threatened with bailiffs and court action if they do not adhere to the demands of the management company.
I congratulate her again, as everyone else does, on this really important debate. Something that really frightened me about one of my constituents was that on her rent charge, she didn't realise that if she defaults, the rent charge owner can repossess her property and enjoy the same rights as if she'd never had the transfer of the freehold in the first place, which is petrifying, I'm sure you'll agree.
Well, what my honourable friend says is absolutely right, and I think this is a misuse of the 1925 Property Act, and that's why we're looking to the government to make some legal changes. This isn't just bad behaviour, this is clearly a deliberate strategy, and they have obviously taken very expensive legal advice in order to develop this strategy, and in order to stop them, we are going to need some legal change. I heard from somebody who lives in the West Midlands, I don't know if it was one of my honourable friend's constituents, who said that he'd had a 17-year battle with Greenbelt, and the legal fees he was charged were £25,000. Now, obviously, the ordinary homeowner can't afford to be shelling out legal fees like that. Despite their name, property management companies appear to have no interest in actively managing the land they acquire. On the website of London and Economic Properties Limited, a Wiltshire-based firm who manage the Midridge Vale development in Childon in my constituency, they list the property under their investments section. They boast of their enviable track record investing across the property spectrum to deliver profits for shareholders. No mention of homeowners. They state this land benefits from grant income from the Forestry Commission, as well as a housing levy from the adjacent housing development, which will provide an annual payment in perpetuity of £100 from each of the 278 houses. There is no mention of their obligations as caretaker for the site. Ultimately, this is the problem. These extortionate fees and poor service are the result of a culture that sees housing as an abstract investment rather than the foundations of our families and communities. This is a massive scam. The House of Commons Library gave me figures which suggest that perhaps 500,000 people have been affected by this problem in the last 10 years. That means that somebody or some people are coining about £100 million a year. So what change is needed? The government have outlined their commitment to reform the process for those buying a new build home to obtain redress. They intend to bring forward legislation to require all developers to belong to a new homes ombudsman. They've also said that they hope to offer freeholders the same rights as leaseholders to challenge the reasonableness of charges at a property tribunal. I'd like to ask the Minister when this is going to be done. When is he going to bring forward these measures? Legislation to improve access to dispute resolution is helpful, but it does not tackle the root problem. The Freehold Properties Management Charges and Shared Facilities Bill, which I introduced in November, recommended 3 changes for homeowners already caught in this trap. Firstly, it would cap and regulate estate maintenance fees to give homeowners financial stability and to allow them to buy and sell their homes, knowing that costs cannot increase indefinitely. Secondly, it would introduce measures to ensure that shared spaces are maintained to a proper standard, perhaps through something similar to the New Homes Ombudsman. Thirdly, it would contain provisions for residents if they chose to opt out of their management company and to self-manage if this is what they wanted to do. For estates yet to be built, the planning regulations need to be tightened to require them to be built to an adoptable standard. Local authorities are currently often willing to adopt the spaces in exchange for an agreed sum from the developer to cover upkeep for a fixed period. For example, Durham County Council asked for 15 years' worth. This is a reasonable ask of an industry which can afford to pay its CEO bonuses of £75 million. Many of these estates were built with support from the government's Help to Buy scheme, financed by taxpayers. I'd like the Minister to tell us this afternoon that the government is going to stop providing this support to any development using this model. Will the Minister also refer the mis-selling aspect of this to the Financial Conduct Authority to investigate the mis-selling, and to the Law Society to strike off lawyers who have unethically worked in the interests of the property dealers while taking fees and purporting to work for the home buyers? A situation has arisen whereby the private estates model is rapidly becoming the norm for new developments, with those who have saved hard for their homes bearing an unfair burden and builders treating them as a cash cow. Homeowners do not want sympathy and understanding. They want action, and they would like to see action now. I hope the Minister will be able to make a clear timetable commitment this afternoon, and I'm looking forward to hearing his response.
The question is that this House has considered freehold estate fees. The debate lasts 1 hour and the finish time is 6:41. I'm obliged to call the front bench spokesman for the opposition no later than 6:19, but until then, it's backbench time. 4 members are seeking to contribute, but I will need to impose a time limit of 5 minutes. And the first speaker will be Preet Kaur Gill.
Thank you, Mr Holloway, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I thank my honourable friend for Bishop Auckland for this debate and for the work she's doing with her bill to regulate freeholders and ensure that freeholders have sufficient rights. Under Section 19 of the Leasehold Reform Act 1967, the creation of the schemes of management allows landlords or scheme managers to receive and require fees from management charges. I welcome the work of the Right Honourable Member to support new bills, but would she also agree with me that the government should go further than that and extend the strengthening of the legal position of all freeholders so that they have access to information concerning where the money they are being forced to pay is going and what it is actually being spent on? The balance of power as it stands is not appropriate or fair. Freeholders are not able to ask for a justification of where the money they are charged as part of estate management schemes goes. However, management companies are able by law to use enforcement agents to collect the money. Does that seem like a reciprocal relationship? I have residents in my constituency who are freeholders but are still obligated to pay management fees. These are separate and additional from service charges. The concern of residents is about the lack of transparency and a feeling of helplessness when trying to find out where the money is being spent or even how much money is left in the pot. And despite paying into this opaque fund, the freehold residents are entirely powerless to compel enforcement of the management scheme. Freehold residents are unable to ensure enforcement of the scheme they pay into and cannot hold anyone to account over expenditure. And for freeholders to be able to hold them to account, surely we do need transparency. And I understand that the government is legislating to give freeholders equivalent rights as leaseholders when it comes to challenging service charges. So will the Minister extend this to management charges as well? Yeah. And if not, will the Minister explain what the difference is? Thank you.
Tammy.
Thank you, Mr Hollowbone. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship this afternoon, and congratulate my honourable friend for securing this debate. Now, I'm old enough to remember when developers would build estates. They were brought up to adoptable standard, and a bond was put there, and the council would adopt and take responsibility for doing what we all expect generally around our homes. A lot has changed. Councils now don't have very much money and are probably keen to pass that on, and developers, as my honourable friend has said, have found another money-making exercise, a bit like leasehold, really, to squeeze even more money out of the sales. And in my own area, companies such as Persimmon in Buckley, Taylor Wimpey in Penaford and Bloor Homes in Broughton have passed on this maintenance requirement onto maintenance companies. My honourable friend has mentioned Greenbelt and Trinity are another one of the big players. And you only need to look on the internet and Google these companies to see what the average resident thinks of the service they are actually providing. Now, at first, when people move in, perhaps the charge is only £100 a year, and it doesn't seem too much, and people are not that bothered about. And the lawyers perhaps haven't exactly pointed out, because, as my honourable friend has said, they may well be very close to the people actually selling the properties. But by year 2, that may have risen to £200, and by year 3, that may be £300, and so on. And there's very little explanation of exactly what this is for, or indeed what the tendering process is for the people actually supposedly doing the work, when indeed the work is actually done in the first place. Now, these are not your sort of London luxury developments that have got a swimming pool and a gym and perhaps someone sitting on the front desk. This is for cutting the grass and maintaining a play area in some cases, maybe a nature area as well. And as well as the standard charge, we are seeing things that are not covered by the standard charge. And this is very vague. If I just talk about Greenbelt, in their very nice glossy little brochure with happy smiling people who are no doubt delighted to be paying the fees that they have, we have a list of services. Now, one of those is fencing. And in what is covered, it says, fences will be checked as part of the routine supervisory inspections. The condition of the fence will be monitored and any repairs instructed as and when required. If we then move on to things that are not covered but are chargeable, we go to fencing works. Fencing works will be identified as part of the routine supervisory inspections. The conditions of the fence will be monitored and any works instructed as and when required. Now, to the ordinary person, these sound very similar, but yet people are being charged extra for this work that isn't covered. And indeed, it is very open to what can be actually charged in these circumstances. And as I've said, residents are not aware, in many cases, what they're actually being charged for. When people move in, there is, certainly in the first year, there doesn't appear to be any breakdown of those charges. And as my honourable friend has said, when they are provided, it would appear that half, if not more, of that charge is actually the management fee. And in my experience, the management fee is never broken down or explained exactly how that large sum of money actually comes about. I will give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way and very much see a lot of similarities in the speech he is making. And would he not agree with me that not only is the frustration in relation to these charges that are being levied, but actually the standards which are actually being maintained are often not as good as those had those estates been adopted. I know some cases where children have practically lived in that home and left home and gone for university before they have the basics like pavements on their estates.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is, my honourable friend is right, and this is a broader issue, just how estates are left. And quite often, the moment the last house is sold, then they don't want to know. The developer doesn't want to know. The standard of work that's being carried out by the maintenance companies. I've had loads of people that say they actually go out and cut the communal areas themselves because they're left in such a terrible state. Many people have described this as like a second council tax, because it is reaching a level now where it is not that £100 that people actually started off with. It's a much higher figure, and particularly for something that most people thought was actually covered by the council tax that they actually pay in the first place. And like leaseholders, freeholders with these charges are coming to me now and saying they are increasingly worried that this could affect the saleability of their property going into the future. Just as leaseholders are telling me that sales are falling through because when people look and say, I'm not going to buy that property. And that is just not an acceptable state. And at the moment, there are no legal protections for people. Leaseholders have some legal protections, but again, I think they are very weak. And I've got a lot of mixed estates where some of the houses, often houses exactly the same next to one another. One is leasehold, one is freehold. The thing they have in common is they all have to pay these management charges. So, in summary, because I know other people want to speak, I think people feel abandoned. They feel that the law doesn't actually protect them and they don't have any redress. And I welcome what the government says, as they do on leasehold. My concern is that's about people building houses now and selling those and moving on. What about the people that are already in these arrangements that are affected, just as leaseholders are? And we need to look after them and make sure that they have fair redress against very unfair charges, and also the ability, where residents want to actually perhaps form their own management companies and run their own maintenance and put out tenders. And maybe the council might want to tender for some of this work and could provide it at a considerably cheaper cost than they're being paid at the moment. It isn't unfair. It is unfair, rather, and we really need to get to grips with this, because otherwise we are storing up huge problems for people in the future.
Mr. Madders.
Thank you, Mr. Oliver. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship once again today, and delighted to follow my honourable friend and neighbour, the member for Allen and Deeside. We may be on separate sides of a national boundary, but it's very clear there are many issues that our constituents share in common, not least the terrible way exploitation has seeped into what should be a very well-regulated and secure investment. And I congratulate my honourable friend, the member for Bishop Auckland, on securing this debate and for the work that she's done to address these issues through her private member's bill. Members will be aware I've also introduced my own bill to usher in a fairer, more streamlined and transparent system to enable the purchase of freeholds by leaseholders. And I have listed in here and in the main chamber on many occasions the abuses perpetrated by freeholders in the current feudal system. And now, having listened to my honourable friend's excellent explanation of the issues in management of such properties, I believe there are many parallels between the two. Regulation is long overdue. Homeowners are being subjected to unjustified extra costs, and there is a distinct lack of transparency. This is clearly another example of homeowners falling foul of greedy developers and some of the more insidious practices that developers have adopted over recent years. We've seen this happen with ground rents and consent fees with leasehold properties, whether flats or houses, where developers have become ever more adept at squeezing cash out of homeowners through the provision of grounds maintenance and other communal services. And as my honourable friend has drawn attention today, we're seeing the leasehold estate fees, freeholders and private housing developments finding themselves facing escalating costs after developers have purchased their homes in good faith and when they sell them off for grounds maintenance for private providers. In blocks of flats, we also see the practice of spurious service charges develop. I recall in my own constituency a block of flats where a management company were only managing 4 flats in a block, but they suddenly increased the service charge from around £50 a year to £911 a year. Many charges in there were questionable, and the insurance charge was one which particularly stood out because the insurers seemed to be very well connected and almost had the same name as the management company. In any other consumer purchase, that just simply would not be allowed. So why is it allowed to happen here? And as honourable members have already referred to today, it does seem that the idea of the developer paying the local authority a commuted sum to cut the grass and maintain the common parts has had its day. I'm not clear whether the blame lies for that with cash-strapped local authorities asking for too much or developers just not being prepared to cough up more funds in advance. But the issue is that the net effect of this is that more and more homeowners are now being asked to, in effect, pay twice for the maintenance of open spaces, once through a management fee and once through their council tax. And of course, council tax pays for lots of things, but something as visible and obvious as grounds maintenance does lead people to ask a very pertinent question about why they are facing a double whammy. My suspicion is the developer will always be tempted to save themselves the expense of having to pay an upfront sum to the local authority by instead letting their customers pay further down the line, long after they have fled the scene. And of course, if you're looking to buy your first home, probably with Help to Buy, the reality is you have nowhere else to go and will have to accept these arrangements whether you genuinely consent to them or not. What is wrong with just building and selling family homes? Why are buyers being subjected to covert efforts to squirrel in extra income? Is the sector so avaricious that it has to squeeze every last penny out of young families who are having to scrimp and save just to get on the housing ladder? As with ground rent and consent fees and leasehold, our PLC house builders have had £8 billion of help through the Help to Buy scheme, and they've trousered this assistance to rip off customers in their own schemes. Developers simply cannot be trusted to play fair with their customers or with us, the wider taxpayers. We have a huge shortage of housing. There are significant barriers for buyers in getting onto the housing ladder, and there are a handful of huge companies who are responsible for the vast majority of housing delivery. The reliance on a small group of developers has been a very poor deal for the taxpayer, and that was against the backdrop against which the leasehold scandal emerged. And I've made it clear before that we cannot be right. The companies that are guilty of the industrial scale rip-offs we've heard in both leasehold and in the issue today can be the same ones that we end up relying on to get out of our very, very real damaging housing crisis. It seems there is an over-reliance on the market, a market that to me is broken, to deliver the new homes that we desperately need. The net effect of all this is that there is little protection for homeowners. People deserve far more protection than they currently get. Sadly, I have seen very little evidence to suggest that developers will act responsibly and adopt fair and reasonable practices on a voluntary basis. The whole system needs a shake-up, and it needs it now.
Julie Elliott.
Thank you, Mr Holloway. As ever, it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I'd also like to thank my honourable friend and close neighbour, the member for Bishop Auckland, for securing this debate on such an important issue that is affecting, I think, every constituency in the country, and certainly many of my constituents in Sunderland Central. The subject of freehold properties and the management costs is one I've had numerous constituents come to me over my years as an MP. They come with real issues regarding the environment around their properties, the lack of care by these companies, often paying large sums of money that go up without much notice, without any relation to real cost. They are paying the money, often hundreds and hundreds of pounds a year, which they agreed to do, and not getting the services or the maintenance that they're actually paying to get. And also in an area like Sunderland, which is a low-wage area, this is often a large proportion of the amount of money that these people have coming into their homes every week. They're keeping their side of the contract, but the companies are not keeping their side of the contract. A couple of things that I would just like to highlight that have happened to my constituents. A light in a communal area taking 6 months to get fixed. And when it is fixed, the light is not suitable for the job it's being done and isn't to the standard that what the one was before, which leads to all sorts of issues to do with safety and all of the other issues, antisocial behaviour that come from when areas aren't lighted. Another example is a van of people coming to do a job in grounds maintenance, sitting in the van all day because there's nobody there directing them or instructing them what to do. Now, not only is that an absolute waste of resources to the company for paying people to sit in the van not knowing what to do, but it's also wasting the hard-earned money of my constituents who pay these fees for a job that should be being done. So the issues that have been discussed by my colleagues I absolutely endorse and will not repeat, but sadly in the current climate the thing that many people would like is for the local authority to take over these maintenance issues. However, in Sunderland, we've had cuts to our local authority budgets of some £250 million since 2010, so it simply isn't a financial option. It's not an option. Councils are struggling to maintain their frontline services, and they simply do not have the funds to put aside to take over the responsibility. So I think effective and intelligent regulation can ensure that this doesn't happen again. Transparency needs to be brought into the system, and the government do need to act. It is not good enough to simply act moving forward on new properties. Yes. We have many, many years of problems building up. It is in some cases making houses unsellable that need addressing. So the government need to look very carefully at what they can do to mitigate these problems for people who already live and own their own properties and are paying these very unscrupulous, completely not transparent fees. Thank you.
Sarah Jones.
Thank you, Mr Holloway. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I congratulate my friend, the member for Bishop Auckland, for securing this debate and for her substantial work on this topic. As we've heard, homeowners on private estates across the country are being fleeced through a system of spiralling fees, shoddy service, lack of choice and zero accountability. I think it's an issue which we know affects many people, up to 1.3 million households. It's a problem which mirrors the exorbitant service charges and decaying standards facing leaseholders, as we've already discussed. And it's a problem which the government has had years to fix and has yet to do so. We heard how obscure some of these charges are in eloquent debates from honourable friends. The member for Allen and Deeside, who told us about the fence that will be looked at but not actually fixed, or the member for Sunderland Central who told us about the light that took 6 months to replace and then it wasn't replaced with the correct light. We heard from my friend from Birmingham, Edgbaston, about how helpless people feel, that sense of helplessness, that sense of being entirely powerless, which was very powerful. And we heard from the member for Ellesmere Port and Neston about how developers are finding more and more ways to basically fleece people and charge more and more. I think there's been a failure from the government side on a number of levels. And I hope that today we can be positive about taking forward some of these issues and acting on them. And I think some very good suggestions have been made from the member for Bishop Auckland. So I think homeowners have been raising this issue for a while. Back in 2016, the Homeowners Alliance said this new model has crept in without democratic scrutiny or discussion, and over the past 10 years or so has become the industry standard. The government said back in 2017 that this was a problem and that they would bring forward changes to the law. But of course, it's not just enough to accept that there is a problem. We have to actually act. And I think that the second problem is that when government did actually publish proposals, as we've talked about, they haven't actually gone far enough to fix the problem in hand. Government says it will give freeholders the right to challenge the reasonableness of charges or appoint a new manager via a tribunal in the same way leaseholders currently can, and we've talked about this. But we know from the government's own repeated consultations on fixing the leasehold sector that the system currently in place for leaseholders isn't actually working. People are not going to trial because they fear the complexity and potential cost of the process. Property companies turning up with teams of lawyers makes an imbalance and a mockery of the system. Our honourable friend from Poplar and Limehouse has previously calculated the overcharging of leaseholders through extortionate service charges is up to £1.4 billion per year. Why then is the government presenting access to tribunals as the solution when this has abjectly failed to stop abuses in the leasehold sector? The government admits this failure, and in April last year it accepted managing agents needed independent regulation, and a working group under Lord Best, I understand, is designing the new regulatory regime to cover aspects such as leaseholder service charges. Will the Minister confirm today whether freehold estate management will be covered by this new independent regulator, and if not, why not? The proposals from my honourable friend from Bishop Auckland are much more likely to tackle abuse of homeowners, with caps on estate charges, as she set out, minimum standards and powers for residents to take over management of communal areas. This last point would mirror the system for common hold for shared residential property. I hope the working group currently designing the regulatory system will look at these proposals. The third failure of governance is to have let a system develop in which roads, green spaces and other public spaces are effectively privatised. Even those who aren't being ripped off are effectively paying twice, as has already been pointed out. They pay council tax, which contributes to maintaining communal areas under council control, and then they're paying again for the private maintenance of their own areas. The government could stop this altogether and I think should act. We talked about who was at fault here, and I think we can't blame councils because we must look at the 50% cut in local authority funding under this government and their £7.8 billion black hole in local services predicted by 2024-25. But I think the government overall has been too slow and too weak and lacking in ambition, and I think today's debate shows that we could do better across the board. The government talks a lot about their credentials on home ownership, but I think today's debate is just another example where they're failing people who've worked hard to buy their own home. 8 years of Conservative failure on home ownership is exacerbated by this very contentious issue that affects many people and where the government could actually act. And I would end, Mr Hollowbone, by quoting from the member for Bishop Auckland, who said that housing is being seen as an abstract investment rather than the foundations of our families and our communities. Homeowners want action and they want it now, and I very much agree.
Minister for Housing. Mr Hollowbone, a great pleasure to serve under your wise and sanguine chairmanship once again. The Honourable Lady and I shared many thrilling meetings of the Treasury Select Committee, so it's a pleasure, and I congratulate her on securing this debate. I know that she's introduced the 10-minute rule bill, which covers these issues, and I thank her for the opportunity to debate an issue that's affecting not only her constituencies, but sadly my constituents too. Now, this government is committed to making the housing market work. By the mid-2020s, we aim to have increased house building to an average of 300,000 net new homes a year. It's vital that as housing supply increases, the quality of new developments continues to improve. We expect all housing developers to deliver good quality housing and estate facilities, to deliver it on time and to treat house buyers fairly. Fairness includes making house buyers aware of arrangements for the upkeep of communal facilities and any fees for which they may be liable. Now, many freeholders, as honourable members have pointed out, must pay charges towards the maintenance or upkeep of communal areas on an estate. The obligation to pay these charges may be provided by a deed of covenant or through an estate rent charge, which forms part of the purchase contract. These charges can include contributions towards the upkeep of open spaces on an estate or for the maintenance of roads and other infrastructure if they are not adopted by the relevant authorities. Now, honourable members have quite rightly raised concerns about the lack of redress if a freeholder disagrees with these charges, and disputes about who should be responsible for and control the maintenance of communal areas. In many cases, contracts do not specify, limit or cap these freeholder charges. This lack of transparency leaves homeowners in a vulnerable position. Leaseholders have a whole suite of protections and rights which enable them to hold management companies to account. Freeholders have no such equivalent, even though they may be paying for the same or similar services. The current situation is unfair to freeholders. We are committed to introduce legislation to plug this gap. We set out our proposed approach to implementing these measures in the recent leasehold reform consultation, which closed on the 26th of November. Just a moment. We intend to create a new statutory regime for freeholders based on the rights enjoyed by leaseholders. This would ensure that maintenance charges must be reasonably incurred, services provided are of an acceptable standard, and includes a right to challenge the reasonableness of charges at the property tribunal.
For giving way. As with leaseholders, though, I think it is and should be relatively easy trying to sort the problem going forward. The issue is, as with leaseholders, is the people already in these arrangements, and to make sure they can do something about it rather than them just feeling that they're not covered or that no one actually cares about them.
Yeah, I mean, the honourable gentleman raises a valid point, and we are also considering whether freeholders should have a right to change the provider of maintenance services by applying to the tribunal for the appointment of a new manager. This may be useful for an existing freeholder if they are dissatisfied with the service they are receiving. The government intends to bring forward legislation to implement these changes as soon as parliamentary time allows. Now, the honourable lady quite rightly challenged us on when that might be. She will know that we have an exciting and packed legislative timetable at the moment, but I understand that our aspiration is that it will be within the next 12 months. I realise that there are many impatient freeholders out there, but we have a small matter of national destiny to deal with before we get onto more equally pressing matters of the domestic agenda, but I assure her that we will be giving it attention as soon as we possibly can. It is absolutely right that consumers should have fair, quick and easy ways to get things put right when they have problems. In October, we announced our intention to bring forward legislation to require all developers to belong to a new homes ombudsman. Last year, we consulted on how we could improve redress for residents across all housing sectors, and we will be publishing our response to that consultation shortly. Now, it has been argued that local authorities should be compelled to adopt all communal facilities on a new estate. At this point, it's worth pausing to consider planning arrangements and how these support new developments. When a new development is granted planning permission, local authorities can use conditions or a Section 106 planning obligation to secure a commitment from developers to provide and maintain open and communal space. This means that the local authority doesn't have to adopt or maintain the land at its own expense. It is up to developers and the local planning authority to agree appropriate funding arrangements as part of these commitments. Conditions and planning obligations cannot, however, currently be used to compel local authorities to do something. The local authority has powers to ensure that developers build and maintain communal facilities to the standards and quality set out in the planning permission. In terms of roads, Local highways authorities are responsible for the maintenance of local public roads in England. A decision on whether to adopt a road is a matter for the local highway authority, and the government has no direct role in this process. It has also been suggested that freeholders who pay these charges should receive a rebate in their council tax, and we think that argument is misplaced. The amount of council tax due from each of us is not adjusted to reflect the specific level of services we receive as residents of the area. Instead, the level of council tax helps the authority to deliver a broad range of services to the wider community in its area. It is open to local authorities to offer council tax discounts to individuals or group of taxpayers. This is entirely a local decision. In the end, all these matters have to be paid for, and there is only so much money that can be extracted from a particular housing development. It's therefore for the discretion of local authorities to decide the balance of 106 and the cost to them of adopting and where and when maintenance should fall on residents rather than on the local authority. It should always be clear to potential purchasers what the arrangements are for the upkeep of open space and the maintenance of roads. However, we do not think that requiring local authorities to adopt all communal facilities on new developments is the right approach. It removes, as I say, local flexibility and, in our view, sends the wrong message to developers about their responsibilities. Where I do agree with the Honourable Lady is in respect of redress. Consumers must have effective ways to get things put right when they have a problem with their housing. That is why we are committed to legislate so that freeholders have a right to challenge the reasonableness of any maintenance charges for which they are liable. And it is why we will establish a new Homes Ombudsman to protect the interests of home buyers and hold developers to account when things go wrong. Now, the Honourable Lady and the Honourable Lady opposite raised 4 specific questions. First of all, on the impact of using Help to Buy as a lever to improve standards. That's certainly something that I'm willing to consider. On mis-selling, it's open to any member of this House to make a reference to the regulatory authorities, whether it's the FCA or the SSRB, and certainly the Honourable Lady sees a lot more. Is the Honourable Lady still on the Treasury Select Committee? No. Well, she knows the FCA well, so if she wants to make a reference, by all means do. As I say, she asked me about the legislative timetable. Our aspiration is in the next 12 months, and in terms of the best review, which was raised as to whether the best review, which is reviewing leasehold and whether those lessons could be transferred across to freeholders, well, the terms of reference for that review have not yet been decided. We'll certainly consider that suggestion as part of the process. So, Mr. Hollowbone, in conclusion, it's certainly the case that as a constituency MP, I have experience of exactly the issues that have been raised and have been in discussion, shall we say, with the developers concerned in my own constituency. So I'm well aware of the issues that have been aired this afternoon, and I'm actually grateful to the Honourable Lady that she's brought such focus to it this afternoon, and I can assure her that we will be taking action as soon as we possibly can.
Helen Goodman to sum up.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hollowbone. Well, I think we've had an important and worthwhile debate, and I'm very grateful to all my colleagues for their contributions. I was overwhelmed with offers for sponsorship when I introduced the 10-minute rule bill from across the House. I think we're creeping forward, or rather, I would say I think the Minister is creeping forward. There will be legislation. Perhaps it'll be in 2019, perhaps not. He has accepted that we need a new right of redress. He's not, however, agreed to any system for regulating the fees or for any system for ensuring transparency. And I think that will be a disappointment to many of my constituents. But I shall do as he suggests. I shall take it up with the Financial Conduct Authority. That will be the next act in my campaign to make some progress here, because it's absolutely clear this is affecting hundreds of thousands of people and we need for change fast.